Greetings, everyone. I'm Maggie Ostara, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. Whether you are coming on live or whether you're going to be watching this recording later, I've been finding that a lot of people have been watching the recording later, which is great. So, we're going to talk today about human design and feminine sovereignty. This is part of a series of my sovereign sister salons, and I've been on a little hiatus the last couple of weeks because I've been in a deep uh, radiant body yoga teacher training, which has been very full on, and it's been great, and I love it, and I love my teacher, and I love that community. And I just needed to put the salons on pause for a couple of weeks while I was in that. But we're going to start winding down soon in the training, and so we're back here with the salons, and I really wanted to talk with you today. We are a week out from our elections happening on November 3rd, or that is theoretically election day, although some huge number of people have already voted, which is great, including myself and my teenager. And I want to urge you to vote if you haven't already, to find a way to vote early and to vote safely, to find a ballot box if you can for your absentee ballot, or to find an early voting place, because I think things are going to get kind of wild next week. I don't really know how exactly, um, but I would just really urge you, and take some friends or family members with you, or ask them if they have voted or not. I think we're headed for a record-breaking vote, which is great. And yeah, so that's part of the context that I wanted to talk to you about today. That is in part spurring the work that I've been doing, and particularly in the second half of 2020, and it has its roots in a lot of ways in the recognition that right now we are inside of a perfect storm of outer circumstances. We had the political sphere has been going on really for years already, but the amplitude of what's been going on in the political sphere has really, really gone up. And part of that was related to the pandemic and what the pandemic has kind of revealed, and also how it's impacting millions and millions of people, whether that is job loss or having kids at home, impacting education, whether that's illness. There's all kinds of different ways, sheltering in place. So many small businesses have been very stressed. Many have closed, and even some larger businesses have closed as well. And so we've had a lot going on in that pandemic realm, and the consequences of that. Then we also have had uprisings that are revealing the inequities around racial justice that have been there for as long as this country has been around, but have had different characters through the years. And I think that there were a lot of us who are white, even those of us who are progressive or liberal, or who really don't think that racism is a good idea. We're kind of clueless about how the lives go for a lot of people who are African American, Latino, Asian Americans to a lesser extent, but I'm sure it still impacts them as well. Indigenous Americans, really people with Black and brown colored skin. And so that has made a really big impact on us as well. And then how all of those have come together, if you will. So I think that like I said, we have kind of a perfect storm that is revealing right now the tensions and the vulnerabilities of so many of us. And so I really believe in the inherent goodness of people, of humanity. I do. I believe in the inherent goodness of people. And I think human design helps us to see the places where that inherent goodness lies and how we can cultivate it. But that inherent goodness is also veiled with many layers of conditioning. And that conditioning stems from fear, really, at its base. And it then creates aggression, because if you're afraid, a lot of times you get aggressive, like a cornered animal will become very aggressive. Or an animal whose children they think other babies are in danger will also become aggressive. Um, so either aggression can come out of that fear, or paralysis, or fleeing. And sometimes we flee up and out of our bodies, and we flee into things that help soothe our nervous system, like television, alcohol, food. Um, there's a variety of different things that are provided to us now that we can flee out of our really our core selves. And so in this situation that is so kind of the amplitude, like I said, has gone up, I think there's a lot of us who have kind of gotten thrown around when we thought we were more stable. And so maybe if you have felt that way, you can kind of take a look at that for yourself and, forgive yourself for that, because it's been intense, right? It's been intense. And I don't think it's going to get less intense really anytime soon. I think it's actually going to get more intense. And so what do we do in that situation, right? Well, in my view, we need to really create a stable base on the inside so that we can be in integrity with ourselves. We can be emotionally well regulated so that we're not being run around by that fear, right? That can, like I said, can create those other responses. It's really just coming from this reptilian brain down here. It's not necessarily registering accurately what's going on around you when that reptilian brain gets going. Past traumas get going, and they can be ancestral as well. And so we really need to become emotionally well regulated and have that kind of inner integrity with our own soul self. I am a spiritual person. I'm not religious, but I do believe in the flow of life, and that each of us has an expanded spiritual part of us, which many of us call the soul, also the inner being. So we need to become in integrity with that part of ourselves. And there's all different ways of doing that. And I've been working with people in that for many, many years, and with myself just as much. We need to have that stable base and a kind of quiet and calm on the inside so that we can respond to what's happening in the outer world effectively. Because what happens if we don't have that inner calm, then we can be reactive and we can just jump into the fray, and actually contribute to the issue. Now, I'm going to say something that some of you might be like, but I want to suggest that part of what we're seeing right now, and I'm seeing it everywhere, is what Charles Eisenstein calls the story of the world, right? Which is our belief system about how we think this is just the way things are. And what we're seeing a lot now is what I would call a story of war, and a story of good and evil. And so wherever you are on the political spectrum, we're seeing massive war taking place there. And the metaphors are all about war. It's all about battle and battleground states. And, so the Democrats are using that language just as much as the Republicans are. And I have my own personal feelings and opinions. I do believe that we need a change of administration. And I do believe that we have some real issues with the current administration, and that we have seen just blatant power plays done, especially in the last week, but really for a while now. And so that is my personal opinion. And I want to say, in the midst of all of that, we still have this language about war. and we have to beat the evil. And so what I want to suggest is to take a look at how human design, what it helps us see about that, and what it has to say about that. Because in the human design chart, the only type of war that there is lives in the defense circuit, which is tribal energy. And tribal energy is really about smaller groups of people. Okay. We as a humanity, for the vast majority of our history, lived in groups of anywhere from 50 to 150 people. That's a tribe. Okay. We didn't live in massive cities. We didn't live in heavily populated countries the way that we do now. And so most of our existence, we lived in much smaller communities, 50 to 150 people. And that the tribal energy that is in that kind of existence, when it comes to aggression per se, has to do with protecting our children, protecting our loved ones, and making sure that we have enough food, basically, and that we have enough resources for us to be able to get through our time. And Shelley, I see your hand raised. I'm going to invite you to just put, if you have a comment, to put it in the chat. Oh, my volume is low. I don't know if that's going to help at all. Is that any better? Is that any better, Shelley? I'm also speaking a little bit quiet today. Okay, I'll speak up. That is better? Okay, thank you for telling me. All right. So tribal energy, right? And when we take this kind of energy around aggression, okay, and then we put it out into a world scale, which is where we're at now, that does not exist in the human design chart. There is no war or aggression like that in the collective circuits. So if you know or don't know what I'm talking about with human design, it's okay, because I think you could understand what I'm saying. In the tribal circuits, that's more about that energy. It's smaller scale, okay? The same is true with commerce. Commerce in human design is primarily tribal energy. It's not collective energy. So what can we learn from this? What we can learn is that small business is good, right? Making certain kinds of decisions on a smaller scale. Like if we just look at the structure of our country, you could see that individual states are more tribal compared to the United States, which is more collective, or your city government is more tribal compared to your state government. Okay, and then you can take it to the global, right, to the national, and then to the global. Okay, so if we can just understand that aggression is inside of our evolution as humanity, because the human design chart is it is a map of our collective evolution as well as of our individual evolution, as we are working to embody the most awakened aspects of our human design chart. The same is true for all of us collectively, that our role as an evolving humanity is to express and embody the highest aspects of our human design chart. Okay, and let's just remember, we all have access to all of the human design chart, whether we have it defined, which is the parts that are colored in, or whether it's open, which are the parts that are white. We still experience all of the energies of the chart all the time. So just recall that, okay? And so you have access to all of those energies, and the collective, which is really the organization of all the tribes, doesn't have war in it. It doesn't have aggression for even for protecting our children or our food or our resources in it. And so if you think about that, when we got the development of Western culture, we had something that went from tribal to more and more and more collective over time as we built bigger and bigger and bigger countries and systems of people. And really, it's in the last 500 years, which is not very long, and really in the last 150 years, uh, where we have just kind of taken over the globe, okay, populated the globe, created nation states, right? So all of that has happened really fast. But we're still carrying with us this idea that is tribal about aggression and war. And we're acting it out on the collective scale. So we need to be evolving out of that into a different type of awareness and a different way of relating with each other. And so what I want to suggest is that um, this is actually one of the most vital questions of our time, because we cannot afford as a species and as a planet to continue to operate the way that we have, because we've kind of been, really as the sovereign species, if you will. I mean, we're the head predator, right? We're the number one predator, and we're the sovereign species in the old sense, right? But we're really kind of that sovereign species of the despot who takes all the resources that he or she wants, right? And that's what we've done with our earth. And so we have ravaged the earth in this pursuit of progress, this idea of progress, and using the energy of aggression that's coming out of fear of not having enough, right? Which has put us in fighting each other. And this is the victim perpetrator rescuer paradigm, where it's one version of it on a massive scale. Which is how you can see some of our political figures who keep characterizing themselves as victims when they're actually the aggressor, right? And so it's kind of just cycles around and cycles around and cycles around. Okay, so that's the context. So given that, like, what do we do? Like, how do we respond? And so my inquiry has been through human design, and then also through feminine sovereignty, is how do we respond differently? How do we engage with life differently? And so I think probably a lot of you know, I've been working with the notion of sovereignty for a really long time. But as I have been writing about it more in this series of books that I'm writing, is I started to realize it's not just sovereignty, because I was initially writing primarily about personal sovereignty. And I was writing about the ways that we create that stable base inside, and about our conditioning and how do we peel away the layers of conditioning so that this kind of deeper intelligence, which is part of our soul self, and I think the kind of vibrant light of the goodness of humanity, right? Each one of us being an expression of that, and it bringing an expression of spirit, that as we peel away the layers, that inherent goodness comes out. And that was my kind of first focus, was sovereignty, personally and with clients. That's still vital. But in this last year, what I started to realize is that's only part of it, because sovereignty also needs to be about that idea of the benevolent ruler, right? The benevolent ruler, because sovereignty was originally uh, an idea that the ruling families of Europe created in like the 14th century in order to consolidate their power, 1400s, 15th century, in order to consolidate their power, and that they were the sovereigns, right? And the idea of this did include both rights and responsibilities, that this sovereign yes, had access to resources and was the lawgiver, but was designed for the good of the people and not just for the accumulation of that, of the wealth and the power of the crown, if you will. And that energy lives in the gate 45 in human design. It is, I've got, well, I'll come back to that. Lives in the gate 45 in human design. It's on the throat. It's the end of tribal circuit. And it is known in traditional human design as the king or queen gate. Our current president has the 45, and that is tribal energy. And so it's also Karen, my teacher, Karen Curry Parker, calls it natural leadership in quantum human design. And there is a regalness to it and a power to it for sure. But it can also become the despot because it has that shadow side of the despot. And we've seen this expressed a lot through the history of kings and queens, and I think of Europe because that's where most of my training has been, my history training. A lot of despotism, right? Not as much benevolence as we might have liked, although one of the reasons people really love Elizabeth I is that she was very benevolent with her own people. Unfortunately, she's helped to spread colonialism through the New World, so that wasn't so benevolent. But at least with her own people, she was a patron of the arts. She was religiously tolerant, which was really great after decades of religious war. So we have some examples of benevolent leadership in that kind of tribal energy, but a lot of it has been very steeped in that aggression, that accumulation, and that fear. Okay, and so human design shows us that there is a limitation in that kind of leadership and in that kind of energy. And so it also shows us that, and let me just say that is, in being tribal, it is not collective. It actually isn't very functional, even when it's benevolent, when you get to a really big scale. And so what human design shows us is that the leadership for, and what I call, this is where the New World Leader, which is one of my feminine sovereign archetypes, lives, is in the gate 31. Which is, traditional human design calls it democracy, okay? And it's the democratic leader. And this is the end of the logic circuit, which is a collective circuit. But one of the important things about it, and I'll show this in a slide in a minute, is that energy, yes, it comes through the logic circuit. So it has all of those aspects of it. It has science as part of it. It has logic and reason and analysis of it's part of it. But it's not ruled by science. Science here is an ally and a tool, but not the master. And what is even bigger is that this kind of leadership can see patterns on a much more massive scale. And that is part of what we need right now. Because in order to address climate change, for example, we have to be able to see the patterns on a global scale, right? We have to be able to be looking at the interactions of different factors, not just nationally, but globally. So we need to be able to develop this perspective, which is much bigger than the tribal perspective. And if you can imagine, if you take that tribal perspective, which is really just trying to make sure that our own has everything they need, and then you blow that up into a leader who has a much bigger role, but actually can't see the other tribes, right? And can't see the way that we need to take care of all the tribes. That's kind of what we got going on right now, okay? And so we need a leadership that can see all the tribes and the patterning inside of it, okay? But the other piece is that the gate 31 is also on on the throat, which totally makes sense, right? Both the 45 and the 31 are on the throat because the throat is the center for expression and manifestation, right? This is the power to be in charge and in command is on the throat. But it also comes directly up from the heart, comes directly up from the G center. Whereas the 45, the energy is coming up from the will center. Okay, very different energy. It is technically the kind of part of the heart energy, but it's the heart that has willpower and it has value. It's about money and courage. Okay, and the G center is more about the heart that has to do with love and identity and direction. And so that energy of love is fueling the 31. So even though the logic circuit can feel a little cold in certain respects, certainly compared to the sensing circuit, which is the other main collective circuit, which is all about feeling and felt sense, which we also need for our healthy collective, is we need not, it's kind of the right brain, left brain. That's a whole nother class. But I just want to say here, the 31 is really nourished by and fed by and fueled by and flavored by, if you will, that energy coming up through the 7. And the 7 is all about collaboration. It's all about being in this together. It's all about supporting the leadership by supporting the collaboration. And if you see that again on the collective level, this is super helpful. Okay. So I hope this is making sense. Maybe you could pop something in the chat and let me know how this is landing for you. Okay, great. And if you're over there on Facebook Live, you can do that too. Okay. So how does this connect with, so this is human design, right? And the human design part of it. But then I also want to talk to you about, go back to sovereignty and what I was talking about sovereignty. Before I do that, let me just see. Yeah, let me just do this piece here. All right. So here is the human design mandala. And I always love to just see and gaze at the mandala and to remind us that this is the template of an evolving humanity, right? And that it is really showing us what are the elements for our evolution. Okay. And like I said earlier on, it's like multinational corporations, not on the chart. Global war of the nature that we've had really for the last, whatever, 120 years, not in the chart. Okay. So we've been really off what this is showing us is more of our role. Okay. So here is where the gate 45 is. Right. And I was just talking about it being fueled by the will center, and the will center is a motor, and it has a very, very powerful energy, but it has a lot to do with will and courage. Whereas here is the 31, which is coming directly off of the G center, okay, and the 7. The 21 over here, which is actually my main primary gate, is kind of known as the seat of management, if you will. And it's about resources. So it's interesting because this one is about managing resources, and in a benevolent situation, we would make sure that there were enough resources for everyone. And it's also about managing our own personal resources. Whereas if we go over to the 7, which is fueling in the mate of the 31, it's about collaboration, right? It's not so much about being concerned about resources. It's much more concerned about collaborating and making sure that everyone is involved. Okay, so let me go back to this piece about sovereignty, where I was talking about how I was thinking that sovereignty was really something that was primarily on the inside. But human design, even in this conversation that I've just been sharing with you, has shown me that sovereignty also needs to continue to evolve. So we have the king and queen, right? Then we had the sovereign state, which is the United States, was the first sovereign state. Now we have the world populated with sovereign states because we've gotten rid of the monarchy in most places. And so we have sovereign states. Um, and then we get personal sovereignty, which is something that people are starting to use and a lot now. I've been seeing this term come up a lot around and personal sovereignty. And I take that to primarily mean when people use that, and it is largely the way I was initially using it, having to do with our ability to have command over our own physical body. You know, like as women, we lost our sovereignty under patriarchy often. You know, certainly the people from Africa who were brought here to what became the United States, they lost their bodily sovereignty when they were enslaved by the Europeans who brought them over here. Certainly Indigenous Americans lost their sovereignty, and there's a lot of talk about Indigenous sovereignty now in tribal lands as Europeans took over the continent. So there's definitely that kind of thinking about sovereignty. And so the assertion of sovereignty is that I have the ability to decide what to do with my own body. It'll be very interesting to see what happens with Roe v. Wade going forward, because Roe v. Wade was really about women having sovereignty over their own bodies and being able to have choice about what they did with their bodies. Just so you know, it's not pro-abortion. If you have that idea, it's not pro-abortion. It's pro-choice. It's about women having sovereignty over their bodies. And so on, right? So it's that, but then it's also that inner integrity that I was talking about and being able to create that stable base inside. But what I've really seen, and as I was writing about this, is I was realizing it's actually about us evolving ourselves to another level, which is I'm now calling feminine sovereignty, which has to do with, and I actually want to pull up a slide for you. That has to do with particular qualities. Yes, it does have to do with that inner, the inner, sorry, let me get this up away here. I want to just pull up a slide for you. Let me stop this. Sorry, give me a second. I didn't pop this one in here. Oh, come on. Sorry. What I want to pull up for you is the, it'll be in here. No, don't go there. Okay. There we go. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, let me share this again. Thanks for hanging in there with me for a second. Okay, so I started to realize that sovereignty, as I was working with it, like I said, it was more feminine sovereignty. And this happened in a very dynamic relationship between me writing about sovereignty, right? And then also working with human design. And then looking at how to make sovereignty more accessible to people, what I was talking about. And that's when the feminine sovereign archetypes started to show up for me. And I'm going to talk about them in a minute. But here are 8 pillars of feminine sovereignty that I'm now working with, that are part of the the material that I've been developing around the feminine sovereignty work and the feminine sovereign archetypes. And so I'm just going to show these to you briefly. And but the reason I want to bring them up is I want you to get, so all these three, these first four are all have to do with that inner self, right? So co-creator with the flow of life means that we're connected um, to our own spirit self or to our own soul, right? And we know how to connect with that. And those of us who have like sacral authority, for example, that is one way that we're co-creators with the flow of life. Or if your spleen is defined, or you've got a lot of the knowing circuit in human design, those are ways that you are connecting with, and you're a co-creator with the flow of life. Emotional intelligence, I talked about that earlier, right? We need to be able to move out of that fear aggression cycle into a more evolved, a more mature, a broader perspective, and a different way of seeing ourselves both, interpersonally, just, like with our loved ones, but also interpersonally, globally. Radiance or magnetic is part of how we as generators and as projectors are going to have things, we're going to bring things to us, whether it's invitations or opportunities. And it's also a benefit for manifestors and for reflectors as well, because it is part of the way that we engage in life at the highest possible level. Embodiment and vital has to do with physical vitality and also being located in the body, and not that thing that I said, like, cruising around up in the, kind of outside your body, which we can do when we flee. Okay. But knowing your role, and this is kind of the place where it shifts, is knowing your role, your purpose, and your terrain has to do with knowing where you're situated inside of a larger world, and knowing that whatever all of the different things that are going on out there, you just have to focus on your own role. Okay. But knowing what that is and understanding that that role is connected to all of the different layers of what's happening, so that you are a vital contributing part of the whole. Being an excellent communicator, this is the place where it's not just about sovereignty as me. I get to decide what's right for me. I get to do, my own thing, as long as it doesn't bother anybody else, right? Which can lead you to being pretty stuck in your own point of view. And if you have a defined ajna, that can exacerbate that, because a lot of times you can be kind of stuck in your own point of view if you have a defined ajna. So being an excellent communicator means that we need to be able to listen and really hear other people, and to be influenced by what it is that they have to say. This is absolutely critical for collective energy, right? So that we can hear people who are different from us, and we can find a way to develop some common ground, so that we can start to live together and work together here on our planet. Um, Collaborative, absolutely. This is the 7, and I have the 7 defined, so I love collaboration. But we have to learn how to be collaborative, right? And I think that this is something that women kind of tend to do more naturally, if you will. But I think men can do it also. Absolutely. I've seen men do it. I've been hearing a lot about how the firefighters up and down through California have been being so collaborative, and even people from other countries have come to help us, and certainly from other parts of, and all the agencies working together. So it's definitely something that men can do. And actually, all of these are things that men can embody, just because it's feminine sovereignty. It's also for men. But then benevolence and concern for all. And so that's the part where the responsibility comes into the sovereign. And it's not just the sovereign getting to be, in charge, and to take all the resources for themselves and use them just for their own people, right? It's about really having that bigger perspective of benevolence and concern for all. And so this is the next evolution of sovereignty, in my view, as I'm working with it. And it's what I'm calling feminine sovereignty. Now, one of the things that really I want to invite you to investigate, and I'm going to suggest, if you haven't already done this, which is to take the quiz, what is your feminine sovereign archetype? And you can get it at sovereignquiz.com. And it's fun. I've had hundreds of people take it already. And it's illuminating. I've had some really great feedback from it, and I would love to get feedback from you as you take it. You also get a bunch of really great goodies. You get a beautiful video and an ebook and a masterclass when you participate in this. So I invite you to check it out. But I started playing around with these archetypes because I thought, well, okay, so it's interesting because the pillars both came out of the archetypes, and the pillars inform my understanding of the archetypes. So it's very dynamic, it's very creative, it's very dialectical. And all of the feminine sovereign archetypes express all of the pillars of feminine sovereignty, but they do them in different ways. And the feminine sovereign archetypes really started to call to me, if you will. I think because I was looking for ways to help people get in touch with what sovereignty meant, and the kind of the different faces it can have. So here's a picture of the representations of the, oh, excuse me, the feminine sovereign archetypes, the 6 feminine sovereign archetypes that I work with in the quiz and in the material that I just mentioned. And also there's a new program that I am, currently enrolling, which I'll tell you about in a minute, which is about journeying with the archetypes. And so we've got here on the upper left, this is the wise woman. Then we've got the visionary. We've got the high priestess, the queen, the new world leader, and the earth mother. And so I was really drawn to developing these, partly because it's fun. And we could use fun in this kind of, this time when things are so intense. But also because they speak to us from a different realm, from the imaginal realm. And they can help us understand that there's many different ways that we can express ourselves as feminine sovereigns or our feminine sovereignty. It doesn't all have to be one way. And my understanding of human design really informed my understanding of these feminine sovereign archetypes. Because when I started thinking about it, I was like, okay, so high priestess. So the high priestess has been around forever, right? Right? Timeless figure. And there's a new flourishing of the high priestess in our world today. But she's also as old as anything we can think of with humanity, right? And she lives in the imaginal realm. Well, archetypes that live in the imaginal realm, which is related to the collective unconscious, what Carl Jung called that, also have many different forms. So even though it's the high priestess, she can also have many, many different forms and many different expressions. And so I was thinking about, well, so the high priestess, where does she live in the human design chart, right? Well, she lives in, I immediately thought, well, she lives in the 51. The 51, let me just show you where the 51, oh, this is too small. The 51 is right here. And the 51, it's also on the will center. The 51 in the traditional human design is known as the gate of shock. And this can mean, I have this defined in my chart, and it can mean that, you either have shocking experiences, or you can shock other people. You can create shocking experiences, either unconsciously or purposefully. And so, yeah, so that's the gate of shock. But in quantum human design and in its higher expression, we can also see this as a kind of initiatory energy, right? And what does the high priestess do but help initiate us into higher consciousness? And so the high priestess lives in gate 51, but she also lives in gate 61, which is in the head center, and it's up here. And it's known as the gate of wonder. Um, And it's a beautiful energy about being plugged directly into super consciousness. It's the beginning of the knowing circuit. So she also lives there, right? Because the high priestess needs to be really plugged in, as it were, right? And so you might think it lives in the 57, which is also intuition, right? But the 57, because it's in the spleen, is kind of tainted with fear, or it can be instinctual intuition. Whereas this intuition that's coming in through the 61 is just pure plugging plugging into super consciousness. So the priestess in our higher aspect has got that 61, right? But it also reveals to us the shadow side and the disempowered side. So this is one of the ways that really dialing into the feminine sovereign archetypes has influenced my understanding of um, human design. Is that because a lot of times in human design we talk about, well, there's a higher aspect and a lower aspect, right? Ra used to like to talk a lot about the kind of the not self, which he always located inside of the openness, and what would happen with the not self, which is basically your conditioning, right? When you're conditioned. The thing is that we're conditioned in so many different ways that I don't know that there's just one piece of that. But in any event, but I started to break that into two, because when I really thought about uh, women, especially historically, but I think this is true for men as well, is that we don't just have a higher aspect and a lower aspect, that we have an awakened part of us, which is when we're more clear on our evolutionary path. So like the high priestess with the gate 51, she can be clear to know when is the right time to bring out a pattern interrupt that could stimulate somebody into higher consciousness. It could disrupt their sense of normal. It could disrupt their belief system, right? In a way that could be shocking, but the shock isn't the overwhelming experience, because there could also be a huge opening and an aha and a big experience of expansion with a new perspective. So in her awakened state, the high priestess is going to be really tuning into that, and she's going to use that intuition coming in from that 61 to know when is the right time to do that, right? Is this the right person? Is this the right environment? Is it the right time? And so she's going to be utilizing all of her faculties to become very effective in that way. Whereas if she is in her shadow state, then she's not particularly feeling her 61. She's not plugged into super consciousness. She can feel isolated or cut off or in a separate state. And then she can start to become controlling. And she may just be using that power to shock in order to control people, right? In order to elevate her own significance compared to others, in order to create a hierarchy, right? That's a shadow state for that energy. And for the high priestess, if you think about the way the energy of those two gates interact. But a disempowered state for the high priestess would be as if she doesn't believe her intuition, and she doesn't trust that ability to create pattern interrupts, and to initiate others into higher consciousness. She could basically be afraid of her own power, and so she withdraws, and she does not utilize these superpowers that she has of the 61 and the 51. Okay, so that's a disempowered state. And women have been taught that for millennia, that a disempowered state is normal. That's kind of our normal state, and we still get that. And so we're still working on revealing what we think of as a normal way of being. We're revealing the disempowered aspects of it. We're still in that process because the conditioning has been so long and so deep. And I think that the shadow state for a lot of women is responding to that disempowered, but doing it still inside of this feeling of being cut off from source, and using that aggressive uh, energy, like I was talking about before, right? Being inside of that victim perpetrator um, rescuer, that cycle, rather than being able to step outside of it, which is what she would do in her awakened state. So that's an example, brief example of how I've been working with human design and the feminine sovereign archetypes together. And then we look at how does the high priestess express all of the different pillars of feminine sovereignty, right? And we could go through the different pillars of feminine sovereignty and show how she expresses them and what is the character and the flavor of that. And it's also true that for those of you who want to work with this with me, you'll get the opportunity to feel into that for yourself. Because, for example, if you're drawn to the high priestess, then you're going to have experiences and resonances in your life already about your priestess self. And you're going to be able to bring that to your understanding of this and help to enrich what this body of work is all about. And so I'm really delighted to be able to co-create this with those of you who are drawn to this and who want to check it out. So take the quiz. That's your first step. If you are interested in finding out more, sovereignquiz.com, and I'll stick that in the chat when I stop sharing. And then I also want to just tell you here, and there will be an email going out about this, but about this program that I'm currently enrolling in, and it's called Becoming Sovereign, Journey with the 6 Feminine Sovereign Archetypes, Experience Greater Empowerment, Influence, and Exquisite Soul Satisfaction. And if you want to check it out, you can go to ostaraexperience.com/journey with the archetypes. That's the registration page. And like I said, you get to journey with the archetypes and work with the 8 pillars of feminine sovereignty. And human design is a critical aspect, excuse me, of all of this. So because it enlivens the way that we understand the feminine sovereign archetypes, and I'm going to continue to build this out as we go along. And also, I'm going to start working with how human design helps us really understand the pillars of sovereignty and how the pillars of feminine sovereignty help us understand human design. So it's a really rich inquiry that I invite you to check out with me if you are drawn to this. And one of the things I would say about it is that it would be right for you if you get this piece around needing to develop that inner stable base. I think that for me, the feminine sovereign archetypes, because they reveal these different awakened states, which is a state when we've stepped out of that victim, perpetrator, rescuer cycle. That's what the awakened states are, is a new perspective that happens when you step out of that. And so each of the archetypes reveals that to us. They also reveal to us all these different states in which we're disempowered and in which we act out of a shadow energy. Okay? And that's really vital for us to understand, because a lot of times, and this is especially true with women, but it's also true with men, that we don't even recognize the ways that we're in shadow or the ways that we're disempowered, because sometimes they're so normalized, right? If you think about this idea, for example, that women become manipulative, right? That's a shadow state. To be manipulative is a shadow state. It's not an empowered state. And yet, this idea that women manipulate in order to get things is normalized in our culture, right? So going through the archetypes really helps to reveal those different states of being, if you will, and some of our conditioning around that. And then also what it looks like when we're more and more free of our conditioning. And that helps us to build that inner stability, because it's when we're more free of our conditioning, we're more connected to our authentic power, right? That we can be more sovereign. But they also help us see the ways that we can be benevolent leaders, the way we can be great communicators, the ways we can be collaborative, and so on. So all of that is in there, and it's a deep dive during this program. It's 9 weeks long, 9 sessions, and so a lot of it is it's very experiential. And you get to we do guided meditations, we do journaling, we do art projects. We really work with the energies of the archetypes, and we help you to develop a new perspective on yourself as your own feminine sovereign. Just so you know, I do have some specials. If you decide that you're a yes for this, and you register by Friday, you get a half-hour human design reading with me, which is a $200 value. And if you register by next week, next Monday, using the coupon early 150, then and that's all capital letters, then you'll get $150 off. And that'll bring the purchase price down to $550 or $547, and a 3-pay of $197. Okay, so I wanted to make sure you all knew about that, and I will send out an email, but we do have these time-sensitive bonuses that I wanted to make sure that you knew about. All right, dears, so we are coming to the end of what I wanted to share with you today. And so I want to thank you for being here. And I also wanted to just hear from you. What are you getting out of what I shared today? Do you have any ahas? Do you have any questions? How is this landing for you? Is it supporting you at all in your navigating this challenging time that we're in? Y'all being really quiet today. Okay. Really? No comments today? All right. Well, there we are. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you being here. Thanks for being here on Facebook. Hello to everybody over there. And next week, I will be here with Amanda Eloish. And I actually don't know what her topic is yet, but she is definitely an embodiment of the High Priestess. And so it'll be fun to talk with her. I imagine, I'm sure we'll be talking about feminine sovereignty, and we'll go from there. All right. Okay. Many blessings. Much love. Bye for now.